What if there was a multiplayer horror game where the infected player can disguise themselves as a survivor? Could you imagine the trust issues that this would create with you and your friends?
Is that you, Cyzeck? Is that you?
How would you know if the person standing next to you is truly a survivor or if they're secretly an infected imposter? This idea is what I'm basing my next Steam game off of. But that's not all. The game will have a lot more to it, like a special role called the General that will protect the survivors and vote out the infected. The game will also have some deceiving name swapping abilities and a lot more that you'll see. But before we get to that, make sure to like and subscribe in 5 seconds. Follow me on Discord, tell your dog about my YouTube channel, and give me 5 stars on OnlyFans. Sorry, all this game development stuff is really catching up to me. But let's get started. Now that I have the idea, to start things off, I realized that there are a million different things that I need to do. And as I was becoming completely overwhelmed, I broke down into tiers. The first tier would be to make a new Unity project and create some basic movement for the game. Sounds easy enough. And yep, the players can move and look at each other. Cool. But that's not even the best part. The players can jump too. Now that is awesome. Unlike our player model for the game, Bean. Yep, I need to make a new player model right now. So for the player model, this is what I was thinking, okay? Let me dive deep into the middle of the ocean without my frying pan and see how long it'll take me to have to buy a new car because my old one ran out of gas. But before that, if you don't even understand how many megabytes Fahrenheit a glass of Scooby-Doo orange juice is, then I don't think you'll be able to download Fortnite for free. I'm just being honest with you. Let's make a military character model since the game will take place inside of a military base, and those kind of go together a little bit. Now, if you don't know, 3D modeling is very complex and difficult. First, you have to define the parametric equations for the geometric shapes that will compose your 3D model. Then, you have to implement coordinate transformations to position and orient your parametric. And all that stuff sounds really complicated for someone like me, so thankfully I have a software called Blender to do all that for me. Phew. Anyways, I then actually made the player model in Blender, and this is what the finished model looks like. Oh, and those guys in the background are all of his friends. Yeah, he's got a lot of friends. Yeah. Now the next thing to do was to give this man, or woman, hey, you never know, some animations because it would be pretty goofy if this dude were to walk around looking like he's in a video game. So I got to animating him and everything was coming along well until I had to make a crouch walk animation. Crouch walking animation. But the game needs crouching because the survivors will be able to crouch through holes in a wall to escape the infected. So I just had to deal with this animation looking like my great-great-grandma with scoliosis doing the gritty. But let's see what my subscribers think about the animation. They gotta add that emote to Fortnite. This guy's got a point, but it's not as pointy as our player model's butt. Okay, that's the second time that I've gotten distracted by that, so let's just move on and bring the player model into the game. And he's naked. Oh my. How many times do I have to tell you to put your pants on when I'm recording? Okay, cool, there we go. There's our player model ready to go. But the old player model is still in the game, and I don't like beans anymore. So I killed the old player model, dumped his body, and just like that, we have a fully animated character inside of our gaming experience. But there is still something missing, and that is the arms in the first-person view. If you don't know, in a lot of games, the arms are separated from the player model for easier animation. But the problem is, I don't have a separate arm model yet. Okay, there we go, yep. Now we have some first-person arms in the game. I also added a flashlight, as you can see, except currently, it doesn't flash or light. But hey, we'll get to that. But honestly, this topic is starting to give me stage 3 boredom, so let's move on to a topic that's a little more interesting. Politics. Actually, never mind, that's worse. Now remember this is supposed to be a horror game? Well, I've come to the conclusion that whoever made this game is an idiot. How could they call it a horror game when there's nothing to be scared of? Doesn't that just defeat the entire purpose? As you can tell, there is no horror in our horror game, so now it's time to add some spooky spookies. The main spooky in the game is that the secret infected player can change into the survivor form to trick the other players into thinking they're a survivor. So that means that I need to make an infected player model for when the player is, well, infected. After fondling around in Blender for a while, I made another version of the survivor model, and this will be what the infected player looks like. Now, there are some very important things to know about this infected guy. First, he has a big spike in his head because while doing his taxes, he lost his balance sitting down and fell onto a big protruding spike sticking out of the floor. Yeah, it's a tragic story. He also has a bunch of eyeballs on his back, a tentacle claw, and actually, he just recently started mewing because he wants to get rid of that disgusting saggy jaw. Oh, and he only has one arm. Now that I think about it, I actually don't know why he has one arm, but yeah. Now when the main parts of the game is finished, the infected player can switch between the survivor form and the infected form. I also made some pretty cool attack animations, so now you can actually be dangerous and a threat and a danger to other players. After giving myself a pat on the back for the huge achievement that I just accomplished, I got right back to work and made a stamina mechanic. But I later got rid of it because it turned out to be pretty annoying. Yeah, I just thought I'd let you know in case you're wondering what the blue bar is. One thing about this game that I didn't tell you until now is that there will be a crafting system. The survivors will be able to craft various items like medkits and mine explosives to help them against the infected. But before we can actually craft things in the game, we're gonna need some ingredients. It looks like we're gonna need 1 bag of gummy bears, 2 slices of cheese, 2 slices of bread. Maybe that's the wrong recipe. After some critical thinking, I put together a list of items that will be in the game and broke them down into 2 categories. First is utility. These items are items that you can use, like a medkit or an energy drink. And the other category is ingredients. These will be used to craft our utility items, and for now I came up with a bunch of recipes for crafting, as you can see on my computer device screen. I then navigated over to Blender and made all of the actual item models for the game. I then did the hard part, which is actually making the crafting system with a bunch of complex coding. It's also important to mention that the players will have to find one of these crafting tables in order to craft their items. Where have I seen that before? There are also crafting permissions in the game, meaning only certain roles can craft certain items. For example, only a special role called the General will be able to craft the guns. The General will be responsible for protecting the survivors against the infected. It's kind of like the Sheriff in Roblox's Murder Mystery if you've ever played that. The General role also has a special voting feature to vote out the infected player, but you'll see that a bit later in this video. Alright, remember all those items that I made earlier? Well now, I had to make almost 20 animations for each item because I have to animate the separate first-person arms model, the player model itself, and the player model when he's crouching. This means for every item, there is an item equip, item idle, item walk, item run, item jump, mesh item use, mesh item idle. After finishing that, all the animations are looking great except for one in particular, but we don't talk about that one in particular, okay? Now, as my kidnapper once told me, if there's not a fun map in the game, then I don't get food on the table. And I'm pretty hungry, so map design is what I have to do next. Since the game will take place in a military base, I decided to make a military base for the military. So for the base, I made a military tent, a military hangar, a nice wall, and some bunk beds for the military tent in the military base. I then placed all the various models that I made around the map. But before I do more map design, I began to work on one of the main parts of the game, the tasks for the survivors. For now, I just came up with a little list of tasks to make. The first task is the take out trash task, meaning you have to find trash and then take it to a dumpster. For this task, I created a model. I'm actually tired of the word model. I created a creamy de la creamy of a dumpster. That's a much better way of saying it. And then I created another creamy de la creamy of a trash bag. Yeah, I nailed that pronunciation, didn't I? And here's what the task looks like in the game. Boom. We can throw out our disgusting, smelly garbage, and you can see the game timer reduce when the task is completed. So yeah, if you're a survivor, make sure to do your tasks to reduce the timer so you can win the game. Another task that I added is the find research note task. And you guessed it, for this task, all you need to do is find some research notes around the map. My imagination is extraordinary. I also put some lore on these research notes, but to be honest, it's mostly generated by one of my good AI friends. As I said, my imagination is extraordinary. And by the way, if you're wondering if the infected player can do their tasks as well, the answer is yes, they can. They could do their tasks to act like they're not infected, but the timer will still go down when they complete a task, so they should try not to do their tasks if they don't have to. But before I made more tasks, my kidnapper upstairs left me an email knowing he's unhappy with the current map design. You need to add more to the map or else. Okay, I understand. So after some thinking, I came up with the idea that the main part of the military base should be a bunker. This bunker would take up a big portion of the map and have a lot of different rooms. But to actually create this bunker, first I had to create a floor plan. Being a game developer requires so many different skills, including engineering. I then spent 3 hours taking a layout from paper to actually being in the game. And I also made sure to add a few crouch holes for the survivors to crouch under. And yes, all of that took 3 hours. Not uno, not dos, but 3 hours. If you're wondering why I only upload like once every month or two, then now you know. I then covered up the bunker with a bunch of hills, and I added a couple of entrances as well. For some reason, I thought to add a huge bush so that the players can hide inside of it from the infected. I like to call this bush Fortnite. I then wanted to add some nature to the map, but I honestly forgot what nature looked like. I haven't been out of my house for a while. Like, I've been working on this script for a week now. Please send help. Alright, it's a little late, but now it's time to make that special third role that I was talking about earlier in this video. As you probably know by now, the role is called the General, and he's basically a survivor but with a couple of extra powers. Firstly, only the General starts the game with a gun because his job is to protect the survivors. And the main difference between the general and the survivors is that the general can propose a player to execute. Basically, the general picks a name from the players in the game, and then all the other players can vote either yes or no to execute the person proposed by the general. If the vote passes, then the person voted out basically just dies like they get struck by lightning. And then after that, it tells everyone whether that person was infected or not. And I had to make sure to add some very severe consequences for voting out infected survivors. And by that, I mean adding time to the countdown so the survivors have to wait longer to escape and win the game. That is what I call a good justice system. Speaking of the game timer, currently, when it runs out, the timer just goes negative and everyone stands around awkwardly looking at each other. Yeah, we're having some nice weather today. Obviously, something is supposed to happen when the timer runs out. It definitely isn't supposed to go into the negatives like that. Instead, when the timer runs out, the doors to the military base should open and the survivors should be able to escape the base from the infected and win the game. So I added this big red door that will become activated when the timer runs out, and when a player runs through, they have successfully escaped and won the game. When you win the game, you can secretly stalk everyone in a game and watch their every move. Or in other words, you can spectate. The game is almost ready for playtesting, but before that, I needed to have a main menu where the players will be able to connect to each other. So for that, I quickly copied and pasted over the menu from my previous game Maze Battle and changed the name of the game. You might think this is lazy, but it's actually very smart. See? I took this IQ test to prove my smartiness. Anyways, the game is going to be called Don't Trust, since I think that name goes well with the overall theme of the game. But before I playtested the game with others, I added a couple more tasks. First, I added a task where you have to deliver 3 samples to the lab inside of the bunker, which is pretty cool and all, but then I made the best task in the game so far. This task is basically a simulator of your messy desk. The players have to look through this stack of papers in a medical room and put the health related papers in the stack on the left. You can tell that I was quite inspired by the task style in Among Us right here. And just as I thought I was done with this game for now, I realized I almost forgot probably the most fun feature of the entire game, name swapping. After an intense coding session implementing the system, the infected player can now pull up a menu where he'll be able to choose 2 players to swap names. This will be a lot of fun for tricking other players and creating trust issues. And finally, the game was ready to playtest with my Patreon supporters. By the way, you should totally become a patron right now. Let me know if I should include proximity chat into this game, and go ahead and join the Discord server right now to be able to play this early beta version with me and the boys.